Imagine this for a moment. It's July 20, 1969. More than 600 million people across the world are glued to their televisions, hearts racing, breaths held. And then they hear those famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Neil Armstrong takes his first steps onto the surface of the moon. Humanity had finally done it. We had reached another world. But not long after that moment, another story began to grow. Whispers started, questions spread, and some people began to ask, wait, did that really happen? Did humans really land on the moon? Or was it all an elaborate hoax staged by NASA? This question has turned into one of the most popular conspiracy theories in modern history. And even today, decades later, millions of people still wonder if the moon landing was real or faked. So why do people doubt something that was watched live around the globe? Why do they think the greatest scientific achievement of the 20th century was actually a Hollywood production? And most importantly, what does the evidence really say? That's what we're going to explore today. The moon landing conspiracy theory gained real traction in the 1970s. A book called We Never Went to the Moon by Bill Kaysing was one of the first to spread doubts. Kaysing wasn't a scientist, but he worked for a company that had ties to rocket engineering, and he argued that NASA couldn't possibly have pulled off such a mission with the technology of the time. His book planted the seed of suspicion, and soon other conspiracy theories piled on top. Let's start with one of the most famous claims, the American flag. In the footage from Apollo 11, the flag looks like it's waving, even though there's no atmosphere on the moon. Conspiracy theorists said, aha! If there's no wind on the moon, why does the flag ripple? But here's the real explanation. NASA had designed the flag with a horizontal rod at the top to keep it stretched out, otherwise it would just droop down. When the astronauts were planting it, the fabric twisted and rippled from their movement. In the vacuum of the moon, there's no air resistance, so the fabric kept moving longer than it would on Earth, giving it that waving effect. What looks like proof of fakery is actually proof of physics at work. Another popular argument was about the shadows. People noticed that in some pictures, shadows of objects didn't run perfectly parallel, which made them think multiple light sources were used, like in a movie studio. But the moon's surface isn't flat like a movie stage. It's uneven, with rocks and craters, so shadows naturally stretch at odd angles. Plus, the sun is a very distant light source, so it casts long shadows that bend depending on the terrain. Again, what seems strange at first actually makes perfect sense when you look closer. Then there's the question of stars. If astronauts were standing on the moon with no atmosphere blocking the view, why aren't there any stars in the photos? The answer is simple. The cameras used on Apollo missions were set to capture the bright surface of the moon and the astronauts in their white suits. Stars are faint compared to the bright lunar surface, so the camera settings couldn't pick them up. It's the same reason why if you take a photo outside during the day, you don't see stars in the sky, even though they're there. Conspiracy theorists also pointed at the radiation of space. Between Earth and the moon lies the Van Allen radiation belt, an area filled with charged particles. Some argued that no astronaut could have survived traveling through it. But in reality, the Apollo spacecraft passed through the belts quickly, in less than 2 hours. The radiation exposure was calculated, and it was within safe limits. Astronauts did receive some radiation, but it was no more harmful than a few chest X-rays. Now, here's an important question. If the moon landing was faked, how many people would have had to keep it a secret? We're talking about thousands of scientists, engineers, technicians, and astronauts across multiple missions and years of preparation. To believe it was all staged, you'd have to believe that not a single person out of the thousands broke silence, leaked evidence, or confessed. In history, the bigger the secret, the harder it is to keep. And yet, over 50 years later, no real evidence of a hoax has ever been proven. And here's something conspiracy theorists can't explain: the moon rocks. Apollo missions brought back 382 kilograms of lunar rocks and soil. These samples have been studied by scientists all over the world, not just in the United States. Even countries that weren't politically friendly with America at the time, like the Soviet Union, had access to them. The composition of these rocks is unlike anything found on Earth. They have tiny glass beads from micrometeorite impacts and isotopes formed only in the vacuum of space. If NASA faked the landing, where on Earth could they possibly have gotten those rocks? Think about the technology, too. If it was all staged, why would the Soviet Union, America's biggest rival during the Cold War, go along with the lie? The Soviets were tracking Apollo 11 from the ground with their own radar and radio systems. If the landing had been faked, the USSR would have exposed it instantly to embarrass the United States. Instead, they congratulated NASA. And it's also important to remember that Apollo 11 wasn't the only mission. Between 1969 and 1972, 6 Apollo missions landed on the moon with 12 astronauts walking its surface. Hundreds of hours of footage, thousands of photos, scientific experiments left behind, and even retroreflectors that are still there today bouncing laser beams back to Earth. All of this supports the fact that humans really went to the moon. And yet, despite all this overwhelming evidence, the conspiracy theory lives on. Why? Part of it comes down to human psychology. We love mysteries. We love the idea of hidden truths, of secrets that only a few people know. The moon landing was so incredible, so ahead of its time, that for some people it feels easier to believe it was staged than to accept that humans achieved something so monumental with the technology of the 1960s. But when you step back and piece it all together, the engineering, the physics, the rocks, the independent verification, it paints one clear picture. The moon landing really happened. It was one of humanity's greatest achievements, and it inspired generations to dream bigger, to push further, and to believe that the impossible is possible. So the next time someone asks you, was the moon landing real or faked, you can smile and say, it was real, and here's why. And maybe, just maybe, as we prepare for the next generation of missions to the moon and beyond, people will finally stop asking whether it happened and start asking, what's next?